There are moments in life when we feel the weight of the world pressing down on our shoulders. Circumstances arise that seem bigger than us, challenges that appear impossible to overcome, and battles that drain our strength. In those moments, we often ask ourselves, how can I carry this? How can I fix this? But the truth is you were never meant to carry it alone. You were never designed to fix it in your own power. The key to peace, breakthrough, and victory is found in one simple but profound truth. Life often places us in situations where we cannot see beyond the moment. We are limited beings with finite understanding, and what is right in front of us tends to dominate our thinking. When challenges rise, when pain strikes, or when doors seem to close, our natural response is to panic, strategize, or question how things will ever turn around. But what we must remind ourselves is this: God knows what we don't see. Our vision is short-sighted, but his vision stretches from the beginning of time to the end. While we struggle to understand how today's struggles connect with tomorrow's answers, God is already standing at the finish line with the solution in his hand. He is never caught off guard, never surprised by what happens to us, and never unprepared to provide a way through. Think of it like looking at a massive puzzle. We only hold a single piece in our hand. From our perspective, the jagged edges and odd colors don't seem to make sense. We might even be tempted to think the piece doesn't belong anywhere. But God holds the box top. He sees the full picture. He knows exactly where that piece fits and how it will contribute to the masterpiece he is creating in your life. Trusting him means being willing to place the piece in his hand and allowing him to put it where it belongs. This truth is especially comforting when life takes unexpected turns. Imagine someone who loses a job suddenly. From their viewpoint, it feels like disaster. Questions pile up. How will I provide for my family? How will I pay the bills? Did I do something wrong? But God sees what that person cannot. Perhaps he knows the job was limiting their potential, or maybe he's preparing a better opportunity that will open doors they never imagined. What seems like loss is often divine redirection. God knows the path ahead, and his plan is always better than the fear-driven plan we create in our limited understanding. A powerful example of this can be found in the story of Joseph in the Bible. As a young man, Joseph was betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and thrown into prison. From his perspective, life looked unfair and hopeless. He couldn't possibly see how any of it fit into God's plan. But God saw the end from the beginning. He knew that Joseph's journey through hardship was preparing him to step into a position of influence that would save nations during famine. When Joseph eventually became second in command in Egypt, he told his brothers, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." What Joseph couldn't see while in the pit or the prison, God had already planned before he ever arrived in Egypt. That same principle applies to us today. Trusting God when we don't understand is an act of faith. It's choosing to believe that the author of our story is weaving every chapter together with purpose, even when the chapter we're living through feels painful or confusing. It's believing that what feels like a dead end is often a doorway, that what looks like failure may be the foundation for greater success, and that every tear we cry is seen and remembered by the one who holds tomorrow. So when you face uncertainty and the road ahead looks blurry, remind yourself that God sees clearly. Where your vision ends, his vision begins. Where your understanding falls short, his wisdom carries the answer. You may not know how things will turn out, but you can rest in this truth. God knows what you don't see, and he has already prepared the way forward. There are seasons in life when the weight of our struggles feels unbearable, when every direction we turn seems like another wall, and when our efforts appear too small to make any difference. In these moments, our natural tendency is to fight harder, to strategize more, to push ourselves beyond the point of exhaustion. Yet, despite all of our efforts, the outcome doesn't seem to change. It's in times like these that we need to remember one of the most powerful truths: the battle is not ours, it's God's. When we continue trying to handle life's storms in our own limited strength, we only wear ourselves down. But when we hand the situation over to him, we discover that victory comes not through our striving, but through his power. This truth shifts the way we see everything. If the battle belongs to God, then our role is not to fight in fear, but to stand in faith. He does not ask us to solve every problem, crush every obstacle, or defeat every enemy in our own ability. Instead, he invites us to trust him, to lean into his strength, and to let him fight on our behalf. This is not passivity. It is a bold act of surrender. It is saying, Lord, I acknowledge that I cannot win this on my own, but I know you never lose. When the ancient Israelites faced impossible battles, this was the very promise that carried them forward. They were reminded again and again, do not be afraid, for the Lord will fight for you. In other words, their job was not to panic or despair, but to take their position in faith, to worship in the middle of the conflict, and to watch as God worked on their behalf. That principle remains the same for us today. Think about it. If you were in a courtroom, accused falsely, would you try to argue your own case with no training, no knowledge of the law, and no experience? Or would you entrust your situation to the best lawyer you could find? The wise choice would be to hand your case over to someone with authority, understanding, and power beyond your own. The same is true in the battles of life. We cannot match the wisdom and strength of God. When we try to take control ourselves, we are like amateurs stepping into an arena meant for a champion. But when we release the fight to him, we place the outcome in the hands of the one who has never been defeated. A simple but excellent example can be seen in the life of David facing Goliath. By all human standards, David didn't stand a chance. He was young, small, and untrained for war, while Goliath was a towering warrior armed to the teeth. If the battle depended on David's ability, the outcome would have been obvious. But David's confidence wasn't in himself, it was in God. He declared boldly that the Lord would deliver Goliath into his hands. And what happened? With a single stone, the giant fell. It wasn't David's strength that brought victory. It was God fighting the battle through him. That moment still echoes as a reminder that no matter how overwhelming the enemy looks, the power of God is greater. In our own lives, the giants may look different. Financial struggles, health crises, broken relationships, or overwhelming fear, but the principle is the same. When we try to fight on our own, we crumble under the pressure. When we release the battle to God, we see doors open, solutions come, and strength rise in ways we never imagined. He works through circumstances, through people, and even through what seems like setbacks to bring about victory. The beauty of this truth is that God doesn't just fight for us. He fights with the certainty of victory. He doesn't lose. And if he doesn't lose, then when we trust him with our battles, we position ourselves to share in his triumph. Our responsibility is not to defeat the enemy, but to trust the one who already has. So the next time you face a battle too big to handle, remember this: it was never yours to carry. Step aside, lift your eyes, and let God do what only he can do. There are times in life when we face moments that appear completely impossible. The doctor delivers a diagnosis that seems irreversible. The financial burden feels too heavy to overcome. The relationship seems too broken to restore. Or the dream looks too far gone to ever come alive again. When our backs are against the wall and no path forward seems visible, our human instinct often tells us that it's over. Yet it is in those very moments that God delights to reveal his power. He specializes in impossible situations. What seems like the end to us is often the beginning of his greatest work, because impossibility is not a limitation to him. It is the stage on which his glory is displayed. Think about the nature of impossibility. To us, it signals defeat. We see it as the final boundary, the point where human effort and logic run out. But to God, impossibility is simply an invitation to show that he is bigger than any obstacle we face. The Red Sea was impossible to cross, yet God parted it with a command. The walls of Jericho were impossible to bring down, yet they fell at the sound of praise. Feeding thousands with just a few loaves and fish was impossible, yet in his hands it multiplied until all were satisfied. Time and again, God has proven that what looks impossible to man is perfectly possible with him. What makes this truth so powerful is that God doesn't just work around impossible situations, he transforms them. He doesn't merely make a way of escape. He creates breakthroughs that remind us he alone is God. When we encounter problems we cannot solve, our weakness collides with his strength. This is why the Apostle Paul could confidently say that God's power is made perfect in our weakness. The very moments that bring us to the end of ourselves are the moments where his supernatural power is revealed most clearly. An excellent example of this is found in the story of Lazarus. When Jesus was told that his friend Lazarus was sick, he didn't rush to heal him. In fact, he deliberately waited until Lazarus had died and been buried for 4 days. By then, in human terms, it was too late. Hope was gone, and grief had settled over the family and community. From their perspective, the situation was beyond saving. But when Jesus arrived, he declared that Lazarus would rise again. Standing before the tomb, he called Lazarus out, and the man who had been dead walked out alive. This miracle was more than just a display of compassion. It was a declaration that God is not bound by human limitations. Even death, the most impossible situation of all, was no match for his power. This story holds a powerful lesson for us today. Sometimes God allows situations to reach a point where human solutions are exhausted so that his glory can be revealed. If Lazarus had been healed while sick, it would have been a miracle, but raising him after 4 days in the grave revealed an even greater dimension of God's power. The impossible was the very place where God's glory shined the brightest. When we face impossibilities in our own lives, we are often tempted to despair. But instead of seeing them as dead ends, we can see them as opportunities for God to move. The doctor may say there is no cure, but God says he is the healer. The banker may say there is no way forward, but God says he is the provider. Circumstances may say it's over, but God says nothing is too hard for him. So when you encounter situations that seem impossible, remember that you are standing on the ground where miracles are born. What you see as the end, God sees as the canvas for his glory. Your impossibility is not the end of the story, it's the beginning of his greater plan. And when he steps in, what once seemed hopeless will testify of his power, his faithfulness, and his ability to do what no one else can. When we talk about trust in God, one of the clearest signs that we are actually walking in it is peace. Peace is not just a pleasant feeling, it is the inner evidence that our hearts have truly surrendered to him. Many people say they trust God, yet they are consumed by worry, sleepless nights, and restless thoughts about the future. True trust and deep anxiety cannot occupy the same space for long. When you genuinely place your situation in God's hands, there comes a quiet assurance within you that he is in control. This assurance is what the Bible describes as the peace that surpasses all understanding. It doesn't come because circumstances are suddenly perfect, but because your heart has chosen to rest in the one who holds everything in his hands. Peace in the middle of difficulty is not about pretending problems don't exist. It's not about ignoring pain or denying challenges. It's about a calmness that rises above the storm, rooted in the certainty that God's faithfulness is greater than any chaos we face. Worry says, what if it doesn't work out? But trust says, even if I don't see how, I know God is working. Anxiety focuses on outcomes we cannot control, but trust anchors itself in the character of God, who has never failed and never will. When you trust, you don't have to control every detail. You don't have to know how every question will be answered. Peace takes the place of panic because your confidence shifts from your limited strength to his unlimited wisdom. That is why peace is the proof of trust. It shows that you have let go of fear and taken hold of God's promises. Consider how Jesus responded during the storm on the Sea of Galilee. The disciples, those seasoned fishermen, were terrified as the winds raged and the waves threatened to sink the boat. They panicked, shouting and fearing for their lives. Yet where was Jesus? He was asleep on a cushion in the middle of the storm. His rest was not ignorance, it was perfect trust. He knew the Father was in control. His peace was the evidence of his faith. And when the disciples woke him, he didn't just calm the storm on the sea, he revealed that true calm begins within the heart. A simple but excellent example can be drawn from everyday life. Imagine a small child traveling on an airplane with their parent. Turbulence shakes the plane, and adults around the cabin are gripping their seats, tense with fear. Yet the child, sitting close to their parent, is fast asleep. Why? Because their peace doesn't come from an understanding of aerodynamics or weather patterns. It comes from knowing their parent is with them. The trust they have in that relationship allows them to rest even when everything around them seems unstable. In the same way, when we place our trust in God, We can experience a peace that is not rooted in circumstances, but in His presence. This kind of peace becomes a powerful testimony. When people see you walk through challenges without being consumed by fear, they notice something different. They begin to realize that your calmness is not natural. It is supernatural. It speaks of a God who carries burdens, who holds the future, and who is faithful to keep His word. Peace doesn't just benefit you, it becomes a light that points others to the source of your strength. So if your heart is restless, if your mind is filled with worry, ask yourself this: have I truly trusted God with this situation? Because when trust is genuine, peace follows. You may not know what tomorrow holds, but you can sleep in the storm like Jesus did, confident that the one who commands the wind and waves also holds your life in His hands. Peace is not the absence of problems, it is the presence of trust. And when you carry that peace, you carry undeniable proof that your heart is anchored in God. Trusting God is often misunderstood as simply believing in His existence or agreeing with the idea that He is in control. But true trust goes far deeper than that. It requires surrender. Surrender is not a passive act, nor is it about giving up in defeat. It is the conscious decision to release control of our lives into the hands of the one who knows us better than we know ourselves. It means recognizing that our plans, no matter how carefully thought out, will always be limited compared to God's perfect plan. It is choosing to say, Lord, I may not understand everything, and I cannot control everything, but I willingly place my life in your hands because I believe you know what is best for me. This surrender is often the hardest part of trust because human nature loves control. We like to decide the direction of our lives, manage every detail, and find security in knowing what's next. When things don't unfold according to our expectations, we become anxious, frustrated, or even doubtful. But God invites us into a deeper way of living, a way that lets go of the need to control and instead embraces the freedom of relying on Him. Paradoxically, it is in letting go that we actually find strength, peace, and clarity. What feels like weakness in surrender is actually the gateway to experiencing God's power. Surrender does not mean you stop working hard, stop making decisions, or stop pursuing goals. Instead, it means you acknowledge that your efforts are not ultimate. It means you recognize that God's wisdom is higher, His timing is perfect, and His ways are beyond what you can see. You continue to walk forward, but instead of carrying the pressure of outcomes on your shoulders, you hand them to Him. This is why surrender is an act of strength, not weakness. It takes humility and courage to admit that we cannot do everything on our own and that we need the one who created us to guide our steps. An excellent example of surrender can be seen in the story of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. On the night before His crucifixion, He faced unimaginable anguish. Knowing the suffering that lay ahead, He prayed earnestly, "Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me." In that moment, His humanity was fully revealed. He acknowledged the weight of what He was about to face. But yet He did not stop there. He continued, "Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done." That sentence is the ultimate picture of surrender. Though the path before Him was painful, Jesus entrusted Himself to the Father's will, and through that surrender came the greatest victory the world has ever known: salvation for all humanity. This same principle applies to our lives, though on a smaller scale. Imagine someone struggling with a career decision. They have a clear plan, a timeline, and an idea of how things should unfold. But doors keep closing, opportunities slip away, and frustration grows. Instead of clinging to control, surrender means taking a step back and saying, "God, I don't understand why things aren't working out the way I want, but I trust that you see what I cannot. I release my career, my future, and my expectations into your hands." Often, it is in those moments of surrender that God opens a door that was far better than what we were pushing for. Surrender transforms us. It teaches us to rest instead of worry, but to walk in peace instead of fear, and to live with hope instead of frustration. It removes the burden of control from our hearts and places it on the shoulders of the one who never fails. It does not mean life will always go as we want, but it guarantees that God will be with us every step of the way, working all things for good. In surrender, trust becomes real, and when trust is real, God's strength flows through every part of our lives. Life often brings us moments that feel like crushing setbacks. We plan carefully, work hard, and pour our energy into something we deeply value, only to watch it unravel in ways we didn't expect. These moments can feel like detours or delays, like wasted time or lost opportunities. But what we often don't realize is that God is weaving something bigger than what we can see. What looks like a setback in the moment may actually be the groundwork for a greater setup. His ways are higher than ours, and his vision stretches far beyond what our eyes can grasp. When we trust him with our disappointments, he has a way of transforming them into platforms for growth, strength, and blessings we couldn't have imagined. A setback often feels final because it interrupts the story we thought we were writing. We think in straight lines, step 1, step 2, step 3, until we arrive at the dream or the goal. But God thinks in layers, weaving trials, pauses, and redirections into the narrative for our good. What we call delay, he often calls preparation. The very season that feels like wasted time is often shaping our character, deepening our faith, and equipping us with wisdom for what lies ahead. God is not interested in quick success. He is interested in lasting transformation. And sometimes that transformation comes only through the detours we would never choose for ourselves. When you look at it from God's perspective, a setback is never wasted. If you lose a job, it may feel like the end of security, but God may be preparing you for an opportunity that aligns better with your calling. If a relationship ends, it may feel like rejection, but God may be making room for the right person to enter your life. If your plans collapse, it may feel like failure, but God may be redirecting you to something greater than you could have built on your own. The very thing you think has held you back may be the thing God uses to push you forward into a future you couldn't see. An excellent example of this truth can be found in the life of Joseph. As a young man, Joseph had dreams of greatness, of rising to a position of influence. Yet his path to that dream looked nothing like what he would have expected. Betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and thrown into prison, Joseph experienced setback after setback. From the outside, it looked as though his life was unraveling. But God was at work in every stage. In slavery, Joseph learned responsibility. In prison, he learned leadership and endurance. Each disappointment was preparing him for something larger. Eventually, he was elevated to second in command in Egypt, and through that position, he saved countless lives during a famine, including the very brothers who betrayed him. What seemed like setbacks were actually divine setups that led him to fulfill the purpose God had placed on his life. This story is not just history, it's a reflection of how God still works today. Your closed door is not the end. It may be a shield from something harmful or a stepping stone towards something better. Your delay is not God's denial. It may be his way of ensuring you are ready to carry the blessing when it arrives. Every disappointment, every pause, every failure can be repurposed in his hands. So when life doesn't go as planned, resist the urge to despair. Instead, lift your eyes and remind yourself that God is still writing your story. What you see as a setback, he sees as preparation. What you think has pushed you down may actually be setting you up to rise higher than before. Trust him in the middle of the delay, and you'll find that he never wastes a moment. He is always working, and his setups are greater than anything you could have planned. Faith is one of the most powerful forces a believer can exercise because it connects our limited humanity with the limitless power of God. It is more than positive thinking or wishful hoping. It is an active trust in the character of God, a deep confidence that what he has promised he is able to perform. Faith is not blind. It sees beyond the surface of a situation. While the natural eye looks at reality and sees impossibility, faith looks at the same reality and says, yes, this is hard, but my God is greater. It is the bridge that allows us to step into what God has already prepared. Without faith, we can remain stuck in fear, but with faith, we give God the space to move in ways that defy human reasoning. Faith does not deny reality. It simply declares that reality is not the final word. When you receive a doctor's report, faith does not say, I am not sick. Instead, faith says, yes, I am facing sickness, but I believe my God is the healer. When bills pile up, faith does not say, I don't know anything. Rather, it declares, even though the need is greater than my resources, my God is my provider. Faith speaks hope into despair and life into what looks dead because it takes God at his word and refuses to let circumstances dictate the outcome. What makes faith so powerful is that God responds to it. Again and again, Scripture shows that when people demonstrated faith, miracles happened. Jesus often said to those he healed, "Your faith has made you well." Faith was not the power itself. God was the power, but faith was the channel through which that power flowed. When you activate faith, you are essentially opening the door for God to step into your situation. It positions you to receive what he has already prepared. Faith is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to believe God in spite of fear. It often requires you to step into the unknown, trusting that God's hand will be there to guide and sustain you. That step may not make sense to those around you, but faith is rarely about logic. It's about trust. When Peter stepped out of the boat and walked on water, it wasn't because the laws of nature changed. It was because his faith connected him to the supernatural power of Jesus. The moment he shifted his focus back to the storm, fear took over and he began to sink. But even then, the hand of Jesus lifted him up. Faith doesn't mean you'll never feel shaky, but it does mean that you choose to keep your eyes fixed on the one who never fails. An excellent example of faith activating God's power is found in the story of the woman with the issue of blood. For 12 years, she had suffered with a condition that drained her physically, emotionally, and financially. She had tried every physician, spent all she had, and instead of improving, her condition only grew worse. In the eyes of the world, her situation was hopeless. But when she heard about Jesus, faith stirred within her heart. She said to herself, "If I can just touch the hem of his garment, I will be healed." Pushing through the crowd, she reached out in desperation and touched him. Instantly, she was healed. Jesus stopped and said, "Who touched me?" His disciples were confused because the crowd was pressing all around him. But Jesus explained that power had gone out from him. Her touch was not accidental. It was the touch of faith. In that moment, her faith activated his power, and her life was transformed forever. This story demonstrates what faith can do. It did not matter how long she had been suffering or how impossible her situation looked. The moment she chose to believe, the moment she acted on that belief, God's power was released into her life. That same principle applies to us today. No matter what we are facing, whether it is sickness, financial strain, brokenness, or uncertainty, faith is the key that unlocks God's power. Faith is not passive, it is active trust. It speaks life in the face of death, hope in the face of despair, and victory in the face of defeat. When you choose faith, you are inviting heaven to invade earth, and that is when miracles happen. Your faith may feel small, like a mustard seed, but even that is enough for God to move mountains. Never underestimate the power of simply believing, because when you do, you position yourself for God's power to flow into your situation and bring the breakthrough you need. My friend, whatever situation you are facing today, whether it's sickness, financial pressure, broken relationships, or uncertainty about the future, know this: God has not forgotten you. He is not late and he is not limited. Your role is not to figure everything out. Your role is to trust. Release the weight. Surrender the worry. Lay down the fear. Let God be God in your life. Because when you trust him, he doesn't just handle your situation. He transforms it. He takes what the enemy meant for harm and turns it for good. He takes your midnight hour and brings the dawn. He takes ashes and brings beauty, sorrow and turns it into joy. So today, lift your eyes. Trust God. He is faithful and he will handle your situation.